Welcome to the number one MSU basketball podcast in America. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thank you for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
You just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're going to lose. Coming down the stretch, you're going to lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, here to talk about Michigan State's 85-43 victory in an exhibition game against the Hillsdale Chargers. Before we begin, I just want to remind you that if you have interest in helping support the show, there are many ways you can do that. You can buy our merchandise, you can buy our logo hoodies or t-shirts at thefinalfourisontheschedule.com/merchandise, or you can support the show through one-time gifts via PayPal or Venmo, or at a recurring method through Patreon or Substack. You can do that at thefinalfourisontheschedule.com/support. There you can provide that support, which we greatly appreciate. Helps keep the show going. And let's get into things here. Michigan State hosting the first exhibition game. First opportunity to see the players outside of that scrimmage last Saturday before the Michigan game. And I think we weren't disappointed. We had hoped to see a team that came out focused, and they certainly look like that. I guess we'll get into the game a little bit, but it definitely, and I sent a message to you early on, it definitely looked different, right? This team does not look like last year's team. I mean, The players are very similar, but it is a very different way they're playing. And I felt like the one difference is you definitely saw a change in the second half. At least I don't recall them playing that full court sort of press coverage over most of the court. I don't think they did in the second half. They seemed to just sort of back off that. Sort of like they did. Worked on in the first half, and they're like, okay, we'll just be okay with what we did. But at least in person, it certainly felt like Hillsdale, after about 10, 12 minutes, and again, I think this is probably a pretty good team. We haven't, as we mentioned in the pregame, mostly new players, so we don't really have a good feel for where they're going to end up. But they're generally pretty good. And they looked really, they were frazzled. By the last 6-7 minutes of the half, they were just putting up anything they could. Anytime they had like a window, it kind of reminded me of the Syracuse game for Michigan State. That terrible game in the NCAA tournament a number of years ago, where Michigan State at some point just like, whatever, we've got a crack, we're just putting it up whether it's a good shot or not.
Yeah, I think that the big change and other changes flow from it is the way they're defending. And so there's a couple things going on, maybe three things. One is full court man pressure. I think you're right. I think they backed off it in the second half. To some extent. I don't think that's going to be the case when the games really count, though. It'll be very interesting to see what we see on Sunday against Tennessee, because that's a legitimate opponent that you would think, if the plan is, hey, this is what we're going to do with everybody, and it's going to be a regular function of what Michigan State does, possession to possession, and not just something they throw in as an occasional curveball. I think you'll see it against Tennessee, and I actually do expect to see it. I think it showed. We saw enough of it to see that a team with their kind of depth in a general sense, and then this particular team with its particular players, particularly Tyson Walker and Jaden Akins and Jeremy Fears. Those three guys really stood out for me today defensively. It's really well suited to them. Okay. So that's the first thing. All right. The second thing that was interesting was the fact that you saw Michigan State playing what I would call a much higher line defensively in the half court, particularly in the first half. Again, in the second half, I think they backed off it a little bit. But in the first half, they were really up in ball handlers. and
yeah.
it took its toll. I mean, that was not the way Michigan State has played in recent years. And once again, I go back to the fact, and we have talked about this already on the podcast, that if they were to choose to play more aggressively, this is a team that would seem to be built to do it because they've got guards who can play that way. That was my feeling going in, and what we saw tonight just verifies it. They got a lot of guys. They got 5 guys, true guards, all of whom can play that way. They're all athletic enough. They're all strong enough. And I think they're all savvy enough to be able to do it without that leading to foul trouble, which is one of the things you worry about. The third thing that's worth noting, and this was a surprise to me, is how aggressive Michigan State was in the passing lanes.
Yes.
They are, so off-ball defense is more aggressive. Now, I didn't feel it was straight up gambling, which would be shocking, but they are just much more aggressive off the ball in terms of trying to shoot into passing lanes, to be disruptive, to force turnovers, etc. And it worked. It worked extremely well. That's something you have to be careful with, because when you face savvier teams with better guard play, and I would say that will start, well, they'll see that on Sunday, but in the real games, that'll start as early as the third game for sure against Duke.
Right.
You make yourself vulnerable to getting backdoored. There's ways in which that can be used against you. And that's very much not a fit with Tom Izzo's basketball philosophy. But that said, I think what he's doing is he's giving experienced guys a little bit more freedom. And I just thought, look, they had 11 steals tonight. And that's a game where they're playing everybody. So Tyson Walker and Jaden Akins were the top 2 steals guys. They had Jaden was credited with 3. I'm sorry. Somehow they only credited Tyson with 1 steal. It seemed like he had more than that. But let's say the starting backcourt, those 3 guys had 6 steals combined, right?
Right.
The most that any of them played was Tyson at 22 minutes. Those 3 guys are going to play. AJ only played 18. Those 3 guys are going to play more minutes than that. So I think it's something that, again, I don't expect Michigan State to be a heavy turnover generating defense. That's not a philosophical fit for what Tom Izzo wants to do. But I think this team is probably set to do more of that than we typically see from a Michigan State defense. And I think tonight we got a glimpse of what that might look like. But I was very impressed. I just thought the defense as a whole, that's one part of it, the ball pressure and also, playing passing lanes. That was there. But just in general, the defense was at, I thought, an incredibly high level. I mean, for this time of year, the fluidity of switching, the way guys were denying dribble penetration. Yeah, it's a D2 opponent. They lost 5 of their top 6 scorers from last year. I get all of that. But that's a well-coached program. It's a program that's established very much a winning tradition. I would expect they're going to be pretty good at their level, when all is said and done. So to see Michigan State defend in that way was really impressive. The other thing that goes along with all of this, so if you're being a little bit more aggressive in terms of ball pressure, what you worry about is, well, what do you do when you get beat? What's behind you? 10 blocks tonight as a team. A combined 7 from the reserves: Carson Cooper, Xavier Booker, Cohen Carr. And we talked about this in the preseason. We said, one of the ways that these young guys, I was mostly talking about Booker and Carr, can elevate this team from where they were last year, is they have the potential to give them a rim protection element that last year's team simply did not have. Last year's team, really for the first time in a long time, did not really have much of a rim protection element defensively. They just didn't have many shot blockers. Madi can do a little bit of that, but that was really about it.
Right.
That is no longer the case because you've got 2 freshmen who very much can do that. And you have Carson Cooper, who I assume we'll talk about a lot more, has elevated his play. And now you're seeing what he can be defensively with his athleticism, his wingspan, and footwork and understanding. And boy, you still have Marty in there too. I think this could end up being a much better team in that area of the game than we saw last season. And that'll add another element to the defense. But I was extremely impressed with the defense. It was by far the thing that impressed me the most about what Michigan State did tonight.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. And I don't know how much you could see on TV, but, just watching Hillsdale and their on offense, that was a team that was not stagnant. I mean, they moved.
They set
like 20 picks in a possession. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Plenty of attempts at backdoors. I mean, they're always trying to do it. And to your point, when you're guarding that far out, denying passes and denying the ball, which we see other teams come in and do to Michigan State all the time, it sometimes gives you fits if you don't have, when you're trying to get into your offense. I mean, it was relentless. And the one thing I would notice, and I don't know what it really means, but it certainly seemed like when the reserves came in, so the big, the line change of the freshmen coming in at like the 16, 15 mark, it was almost more frenetic when those freshmen came in, and they would expend. It looked like they were just moving faster or expending more energy. I don't know that they were any more effective, but it definitely maybe that's just partly just because they were just so amped up to be on the court.
I think maybe some of that, and also that when you don't have as advanced an understanding,
exactly,
you might have to expend a little more effort to get the same result.
Yeah, no,
right?
I think so too, for sure.
Yeah.
And the other thing that really impressed me too is there wasn't oftentimes there's not that Michigan State often hides players, but sometimes like a Nick Ward or someone like that. But
sure,
there wasn't like a minus defender out there that I could recall. Maybe Booker got lost a couple times, but for the most part,
not
everyone was switching on everyone.
I've been expecting. Yeah,
they were switching on everybody, and everybody could pretty much it. It was. I could see that there was maybe it just confused Hillsdale or was surprising because they couldn't even get advantages. Even when Walker gets switched on someone shorter, the help would come from even a freshman. I was just very impressed. To your point, I think the defense was the most impressive part that was noticeable. And I had expected more of a change with the full press, but I was more impressed with the half court defense and just how really it was vicious.
Well, that's what I meant really is how connected they looked.
Yeah.
The switching was really well executed. I mean, I remember there was one play where Malik and Mahdi both went with a roll guy and left a shooter who happened to miss, and then they immediately talked about it. Other than that, I really don't recall. Nothing immediately comes to mind, at least in terms of blown assignments. Considering where we are on the calendar, that's a statement, and I agree with you. I think Hillsdale was trying to run good offense, and Michigan State was up to the task. Now, starting on Sunday, you're going to start seeing some opponents who have the ability to make plays against you, even when they might not be running the crispest offense, or you might have actually handled a switch properly. They can still hurt you. They're going to see some of that. But I think in terms of the things that Michigan State can be expected to control, it was really, really impressive. And I also agree with what you're saying about those top 10 guys. So right now it would appear Garrick Normand is the 11th guy. Probably not going to be, for example, in the Duke game, I wouldn't necessarily expect him to see any minutes. We'll see. But if you take him out of the mix, and of course they don't have Jackson Kohler right now, that's a pretty good 10-man group defensively. And you could talk about the freshmen. I mean, Fears is in another class altogether, but I thought Cohen Carr looked pretty together. And I got to say, I'm not saying Xavier Booker is ready to go be picked first in the draft or or anything like that. But I've said this before, if not here, definitely on the Spartan Mag board, but I think here as well. I think there's been a tendency in some quarters to swing the pendulum so far to the side of, well, he's got a long way to go. It's going to be a process, blah, 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 that there's been what I would term an overcorrection. And I think you saw some of the reasons why I'm saying that tonight. Look, was he playing an overmatched team physically? Yes. But the fact is, he hit 2 threes that looked very smooth. And we know he's got the ability to shoot threes. That's not a mystery to anybody. And defensively, he had 3 blocked shots. And I think handled his assignments reasonably well.
Yeah.
Part of the problem is that I think, and this is just a personal opinion, is that Xavier Booker is such a smooth athlete that sometimes, and I'm not saying he doesn't have an issue to correct in terms of his motor. I think he does need to learn how to play harder, consistently, and tougher than he has to this point. I agree with that. But I also think that sometimes because he's so smooth in the way he moves, that he fools people into thinking he's not working hard. The bottom line is, did he have blown assignments today? I didn't see a lot of them. He looked pretty together to me. Now, there are going to be stiffer tests than this. I get it. But for a first game, if he's the worst defender among your top 10 guys, which I think is what a lot of people would say, it's pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, no, without a doubt. And the surprising thing to me is usually there's a fairly significant drop off to freshmen. I think, last year, Trey Holloman was really solid, and which was kind of surprising. And, the year before that, Max Christie. But generally, the freshmen look like they struggle, especially early in the season. And these guys did not really look like they were struggling much. And so that's, again, it's easy to get hyped up. It's Hillsdale. It's a D2 school. So maybe you're a little bit quicker and you can recover a little bit faster and you can't get exploited as much. But they sure seem like they knew where they were supposed to be, that they didn't get lost.
Yeah, but the thing is, and I hear all of that, but the thing is, Jeremy Fears is not going to be rattled by anybody he's playing against, okay? He's going to run together offense, and he's going to get into people and guard them, whether it's a Hillsdale he's playing or it's Duke. That's what's going to happen. Cohen Carr is going to be that athletic against every team he plays.
Right.
Okay. So that's going to allow him to make plays, period. Doesn't matter who the opponent is. Xavier Booker is 6'11" with that kind of fluidity as an athlete and that kind of shooting potential, no matter who he's playing against. So all of those things will show up no matter who they're playing. Now, are there going to be weaknesses that get shown in ways they didn't tonight against better opponents? Sure, absolutely. And they're going to have bouts of inconsistency like every freshman does. But I think the reason primarily that they look better than a lot of what you typically expect from MSU freshmen is because these guys are really, really good. And sometimes it's that simple.
Yeah. They might have been a pretty good recruiting class, huh? I mean, that might.
Yeah. Yeah. Looks that way.
Yeah. So when we had highlighted before the game for the brothers at Just Do Gutters, if you need your gutter work done, and it is fall, it is leaf season, they're still falling, and you want to make sure your gutters stay clear. Maybe they're leaky. Maybe you've got leaves piling up. Maybe you've got some damaged gutters. If you need someone to take care of that, the best people to call are the brothers at Just Do Gutters. They took care of mine. They took care of my wife's office, and they did a great job there. I've got leaf guards in now, so I don't have to deal with those. I don't have to get on the ladder. It's fantastic. I should have done this about 10 years ago. But you want people who care about gutters, and they just focus on it. And I know it's kind of boring to talk about gutters, but you can't go wrong. brothersgutters.com. You can find contact information in the podcast description below. And you get 10% off if you mention Final Four when you contact either on the west side of the state with Kurt or the east side of the state with Greg. You won't go wrong. And then our focus player to keep in the gutter was the only one we could come up with was the only returning starter from the team. Drew Reuter, who averaged 12.5 points a game, and he's held to 3 for 13. He had 8 rebounds. He shot 23% from the floor, 17% from 3, and last season he shot 36%. So, and he only had finished with 7 points and had a turnover. He really struggled. He just kind of scored very late, but he was really neutralized. So they kept him in the gutter, and they did a good job, and that was sort of a reflection on the rest of the roster for the team.
Malik Hall guarded him a lot, and I thought did a really good job.
Yeah,
just kind of containing him.
Yeah, they did a great job, and that was about the whole team pretty much. And so, I guess we'll just go talk about the keys of the game, I suppose. And why don't we do that? And we'll start. The first one is health. There were no injuries. Jackson Kohler walking around in his boot, but other than that, the team seemed to be okay. The only near injury was Davis Smith, who took a huge fall at the very end of the first half, and that was when you hear it from way up where we're sitting, and it looked painful, but he looked okay. But other than that, everyone seemed to come through the game okay.
Yeah. Yep. Not much more to say except that's what you want to see. Exactly.
The number 2 key to the game was pace, and we had expected a lot more. I guess like fast break and transitions, and I don't know that we have those stats because
20. It was, again, these are dubious numbers. You have to keep them in mind, but fast break points were 24-6 in Michigan State's favor. So 24 is a reasonably good number, but I just thought in general, Michigan State did what they want to do. They were in transition a lot, and even when they weren't, they were getting the ball into the forecourt fast and getting into offense fast. Yep. And that's what you want. It's not just about, and again, it's not even just about the point production there. It's about the pressure that you put on an opponent. You mentioned that last 6 to 7 minutes of the first half, it looked like Hillsdale's heads were swimming collectively. And they were. And I think a lot of it was that Michigan State was putting them under relentless pressure in every conceivable way. They were guarding them full court. They were getting into passing lanes. They were getting into them in the half court. And then they were pushing the ball consistently on offense, off makes and misses. And so that was really, really good to see. Again, we're going to get a much better test of that come Sunday, because Tennessee is not only a high major and not only a good high major, but they're also a program that really has made its reputation under Rick Barnes on the defensive end, first and foremost. So that will be a test, but I saw exactly what I wanted to see.
Yeah, and the other thing to add to that too is I can only recall maybe 3 possessions where Michigan State was under 10 before they put a shot up. I mean, so they were
right,
and they were generally speaking very good shots, and so they were that part of the pace. Looks faster. I mean, again, it's Hillsdale, so we don't want to get ahead of ourselves too much, but we'll know more, like you said, the next game. Assist rate was also very good, 82% of assist on the field goal.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's all part of it, and again, it's if you're pushing the ball and the defense gets back, okay, at a minimum, what you've done is you've gotten yourself into your half court offense quicker, which leaves you with more time to get a quality shot, and means that, at least in theory, you should be in those under 10-second scenarios less often.
Right. Yeah, I think there was a comment by Izzo before the season how many field goal attempts he wanted per game. I mean, they ended up with 60, which is not a ton, I think, but it seemed, I can't remember what they were getting last year.
But some of that is also,
I mean, for making them all doesn't matter.
That's a fine number, but it to target, but some of that is going to be dictated by the way you defend. And conversely to what we were just saying, I think Hillsdale was very often, when they weren't turning the ball over, they had 17 turnovers in the game, and 11 of them were steals, so 11 of them were forced. But when they weren't turning the ball over, they were just having a very difficult time getting a good shot, which means they were having to run a lot of clock to get. So that's going to hold your possessions down to some extent.
Exactly. And I guess the other thing that's interesting about that pace, despite playing what we both agree was pretty fast, only 11 turnovers for Michigan State now, which is, I always feel like early in the season, that's always a big bugaboo. They're, averaging 17 to 20 turnovers a game, it seems like. Now, again, the game, the opponent who it is, but even against Grand Valley last year, I think they were, Grand Valley last year, they were really good with turnovers in general. But in general, Michigan State teams have struggled, especially early in the season. And that does not seem to be the case, which we would hope be the case with the veteran starters you have.
Right.
We'll go to the third key of the game in just a moment, just to remind you that these keys of the game are brought to you by Nudge Printing. Nudge Printing is your go-to place for Spartan apparel. You can find them at nudgeprinting.com. Fantastic stuff. You have a bunch of shirts, and my family actually just asked me tonight. They want a bunch more hoodies and stuff, so we're going to get some more super wearable, very comfortable, very breathable. I shot my free throws last season. They sent me to the Final Four. So, I don't know how lucky they'll be for you, but high quality screen printing. You can't go wrong with Nudge Printing. Great prices, free shipping. Just head on over to nudgeprinting.com. That's where you get all our stuff, and that's where all our prizes come from. At nudgeprinting.com, 20% off if you type in Final Four into the coupon code at checkout. So the third one is a freshman. And so the question was, how are they going to look? Well, I'd say pretty good.
Yeah. So we'll start with Garrett Gorman, since he played the least of the group, and frankly, the least is expected. He only played 7 minutes. Didn't do a lot. He missed his lone 3-point attempt. He did score a basket off a really nice kind of transition pump fake and then finish at the rim. Yep. I thought it showed good decision making, showed off his smarts as a player, because he could have easily just taken the three. So good for him. He also had a steal. Didn't do a lot other than those moments, but a nice beginning for him. Get his feet wet, have some positivity. Jeremy Fears, 19 minutes. He was only 1 for 3 from the floor and only finished with 2 points. The one he hit, I thought was a really nice play, because he was kind of in the middle of the lane. Yeah, but what made it nice is, and I think is really bodes well for him, is the body control that he exhibited, because he was at kind of a weird angle, and he still managed to get his body turned to be facing the basket enough to make it a makeable shot. That might not have looked like a difficult play. It was. And the fact that he finished it, I thought was really good. 8 assists in 19 minutes, pretty good stuff. He did have 4 turnovers. I think that's a little unfair. I'll give you an example. One of them for sure, where he got dinged with, was a transition play in the first half where he was trying to go up the floor to Cohen Carr, and Cohen fell.
Yeah.
So the turnover gets charged to Jeremy. It really wasn't his fault. But they only credited him for 1 steal, but he had another play where he forced the Hillsdale ball handler into a 5-second count. Which got some enthusiastic response from Izzo. I just thought both ends of the floor, I thought he looked exactly the way I expected him to look. He was a menace defensively, and he was really poised running the offense. Didn't rush anything, didn't force anything, made other people better. 8 assists is 8 assists. So pretty good there. We talked a little bit about the other 2 guys, but just to put a cap on it, Xavier Booker, 16 minutes. He was 2 for 3 on threes. He also missed maybe a 10-foot baseline jumper. It was a pretty good shot, just didn't go. He had 3 rebounds, but 3 blocks. So 6 points total. And as we talked about, I think actually looked better overall defensively than I had anticipated. So good things there. And Cohen Carr, 15 minutes, the guy scores 12 points, 6 of 8 from the floor. And he really should have been 7 of 8, because he blew a dunk in the second half. But, that it pales by comparison to what he had, 4 or 5 dunks. He must have had 5. But I'll say this, all the dunks were great. And especially, I thought, later in the game, he had a couple where he was just kind of around the rim.
Yeah.
And they're plays that most guys, even some good athletes, are going to end up shooting. They're going to be layup attempts because they're coming off 2 feet. They're coming off being flat. They don't have a running start. Cohen Carr just explodes. I mean, he explodes in a way that very, very few guys you see do. And that is going to be a big advantage for Michigan State. Believe it, that they have a guy like that who can make those kind of plays in traffic around the rim. The most impressive moment I thought he had offensively was his first basket. He had a moment in the first half where he got the ball sort of near the baseline and went off the dribble, spin move, and hit a bank shot.
Yeah.
It was a very, very nice individual offensive play. And it shows you that he does have more than just dunks in his bag, you know? And I think you're going to see that. I also like that transition and one that he had for a layup. That was impressive. In fact, he was able to finish that play. And then, as we talked about, he also had, what do you have, 2 blocks? Yeah, 2 block shots.
Yeah.
Both of which were plays lesser athletes don't make. They were not plays that were just kind of easy blocks, let's put it that way. So, overall, he was exactly as advertised. I mean, he is a potential difference maker. There's no 2 ways about it. That there are not teams in the Big Ten do not have Cohen Carr equivalents on their roster. You know, there isn't anybody like him in the Big Ten. I don't know if there are many guys in the country that are like Cohen Carr.
I don't think so.
So,
especially coming off the bench.
Yeah, very, very impressive for all the freshmen tonight.
So now we'll come to the one that I think was one of the keys to the game, which I think was a little disappointing, and that was offensive rebounding.
Yeah.
Part of it, I mean, I'm not going to I don't think you put a blame on anyone in particular, because I don't think anyone really did a great job rebounding except Carson Cooper, who, not a freshman, but I think we just talk about him before we go. He's not a freshman, but let's talk about him and Trey Holloman, sophomores, but I think looked significantly different than they did last year. I mean, I thought, the knock on Trey, people are talking about, well, Trey Holloman will never see the floor. He's going to barely play. And I mean, the kid plays 19 minutes, same as Jeremy Fears, and he played off ball almost the whole time, but he was comfortable when he had the ball, obviously. Defensively, fantastic, and I would say he was, just as good as Fears and the other guys. He had a couple steals and 4 assists, 1 turnover, and 4 or 5 from the field, 1 or 2 from the line, from 3. And so, I mean, great game from him. And then Cooper. Well, go ahead. We'll talk about Holloman first.
I think the biggest thing with Trey is that you just saw that confidence offensively that we've been talking about. Like, can he play with a level of confidence in his own offensive game? And you see that. Is a guy looking for his own shot, or is he taking shots because the ball just kind of finds him and he has no choice? And there was a lot of that last year with Trey. He seemed hesitant. No hesitancy that I could discern tonight. And that's a really, really good sign. Because I think, and we talked about this last year, I thought his shot looked reasonably good.
Yeah, I thought
it looked good tonight.
Yeah.
The 3 he hit, it was a good shot in rhythm, and he buried it. Period.
Yeah.
So I think very encouraging from him. And look, Michigan State is a legit 5 deep in the backcourt. And I know everybody wants Tyson Walker and Jaden Akins, AJ Hogard to all play 40 minutes a game, but it's not going to happen. And it shouldn't happen, because if you try that, you're not getting the best out of them. It would mean Michigan State isn't playing the way they want to play. And the fact is, they've got 2 guys in Jeremy Fears and Trey Holloman, both, who are fully capable of being plus players in their role and doing a lot of productive things to help you win games. I mean, those 2 guys tonight, what was the total? That 12 assists versus 5 turnovers from those 2 guys. 5 for 8 from the floor, 1 for 2 from 3 combined. Those are your backups. I mean, that's pretty good stuff. Yeah. So I thought it was clearly not a surprise to me, but still good to see validation that Trey is ready to be I thought he showed potential and was respectable last year as a freshman for sure. I think he's going to be at another level as a sophomore.
Yeah, and then I guess Carson Cooper's the other standout who had. I mean,
player of the game in my mind.
I think so too. I think he was. He was impressive on both ends of the floor, except when he's on the free throw line. He was poor there, but that was the whole team. 6 or 7 for the field, 20 minutes played. He had 7 rebounds, 5 of them offensive, 5 defensive rebounds, couple assists, a steal. I mean, ended up with 13 points. He was a guy who has definitely progressed from last season. Super mobile, as we saw last year, and I think you had talked about whether he passes Madi. Maybe. I think Madi in his own way did really well too, and you've got 2 guys who are a little different the way they play, but there's probably more upside certainly with Cooper than Madi. But boy, I mean, there's really no change at the 5. It's your backup is as good as your starter. It's a nice luxury to have.
I'm quite sure if we have a couple more games like this where Madi's good, but Carson Cooper is really good, there'll be cries from the usual suspects about why isn't he starting? Doesn't matter.
Yeah, right.
Doesn't matter. These guys are going to share that position, and they're hopefully going to be running the floor so hard and working so hard that they need a blow, and it'll all work out. But I'm with you. I think Madi played well.
Yeah.
But Carson Cooper, I've been pretty consistent in this since late last year. Of those 3 guys, including Jackson Kohler, who are at that spot, I don't think there's any doubt that the highest ceiling belongs to Carson Cooper. And that's because he is 6'11", so he's the biggest. He's got a wingspan that's in the same ballpark as Madi's. I'm not sure if it's exactly the same or if he's maybe given up an inch or 2 to Madi, but it's very close. But then again, he's also 6'11", and Madi's probably about 6'8".
Yeah, 6'9", yeah.
Carson Cooper is a very high level athlete. And so you put all of those, and he also demonstrated last year that he's one of those kids that has a knack for picking up the defensive end of the floor conceptually, what Michigan State wants from its 5s. He picked it up very, very quickly. And so you put all of that together, and it was pretty easy to say that. I don't think I'm going out on a limb by saying, yeah, he's got the highest ceiling, because he has the best physical tools. And yet he showed enough even as a freshman to suggest, all right, this isn't a 4-year. It isn't a project the way Madi ended up being. It really took it to his 3rd year in the program for him to show enough to the point that you felt comfortable playing him, or that he was even capable of playing that many minutes, because he wouldn't have been able to stay out of foul trouble before that. Carson already passed those tests as a true freshman. So I don't think that's going out on a limb to say he had the highest ceiling. What I saw tonight is another point of validation of the idea that he is making good on that potential very, very quickly. I think everything looks better. He is clearly stronger in the upper body. There's no question about that. And that's going to pay off in some of the stuff you saw him do tonight, particularly as a rebounder.
Mm-hmm.
That will matter there. It'll also matter in terms of his ability to finish plays. Now, he was from the floor. What was he? He was 6 for 7.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of that stuff was in traffic.
Okay? Oh, yeah.
Pretty good. I think he looks, we know he's a very, very, very good athlete, but he looks calm. He looks under control now in a way that he didn't last year. And that's natural that you would, as you gain experience, you begin to calm down and the game slows down for you a little bit. I think there were signs in what we saw tonight that indicate that's happening for Carson. I thought one play he made that was extremely impressive to me in that regard is one where he had the ball down low, kind of around the rim in traffic, and he was patient and found Cohen Carr cutting down the lane for a dunk. That's the kind of play he wouldn't have made last year.
Right.
And I think that's because the wheels were spinning too fast for him last year. They're not anymore. And so you add all that up and put it together with the fact that he's also clearly playing with more confidence. He just looks assertive. He looks like he understands what he's supposed to do. And man, you are talking about, I'm not saying I'm preparing for him to be a first team All Big Ten player this year, but Michigan State with him where he's at and Madi where he's at, who I agree with you. I thought Madi did some very good things tonight. There weren't as many eye-catching moments from him as there were from Carson, but he also didn't make mistakes.
No.
You know, I can't think of any blown. There was the one blown defensive assignment, which fortunately they didn't pay for. That was it. Other than that, I thought Madi played very well at both ends. He was perfect at the free throw line again, which is great for him. That's an area, as you said, Carson's got to work on, but a lot of guys on the team had a bum night from the line.
For sure.
But yeah, you know, you got to feel really good about where Michigan State's 5 spot is for the moment. Now, again, they're going to get a much, much different level of test come Sunday. But the things that Carson showed tonight, I don't think they're not a result of, well, he was playing against Hillsdale. They're a combination of his physical tools, which aren't going to go away, along with a guy who clearly looks like he's developed his body and has a year of experience under his belt and is soaking things up. He's also striking me as a very fast learner too, which is another thing that you can't really predict too well when you have guys come into a program. You know, some guys, Xavier Tillman's a really good example of it, just pick things up at this level fast and they progress very quickly. I think Carson Cooper is closer to that end of it. There are other guys Michigan State's had, I won't name names, but there are guys who had great physical tools that never got it, never really developed, you know? So it's hard to predict that, but I think in Carson Cooper's case, we've got a guy who gets it and is getting more and more of it every day.
All right, so let's return back to offensive rebounding. That was the problem. Michigan State out-rebounded Hillsdale 46-42, which is pretty disappointing.
Yeah.
They gave up 17 offensive rebounds to Hillsdale, so Hillsdale had a 33% offensive rebound rate. Michigan State only ended up with 9 offensive rebounds. Now, they didn't have as many misses, but that was also the same as a 33% offensive rebounding rate, which you'd say is okay. It's pretty good. But I think the disappointing part is, you know, the giving up so many rebounds, and that would be the one little mini criticism I'd have of Booker. There were a number of times when he just got out rebounded, and I think he just wasn't prepared for people. I don't know, not fighting for the ball, but he just wasn't. He wasn't maybe as aggressive or able to hang on to the balls as he should. There were some long rebounds too, because Hillsdale was jacking up crazy threes, and so you know maybe you could give them some of those as well. But they only had 7 at halftime. They got 10 in the second half. They definitely picked it up a little bit, and maybe Michigan State let up. But so that was a little concerning because you definitely would hope that this team would be a lot better than that.
It was. And, you know, the only reason I'm not going to go in harder on this is I've seen very good Michigan State rebounding teams struggle in the early part of the season with undersized opponents. This is not my first rodeo. So that's the only caveat I have to it. But in general, I agree with you. They weren't horrendous, but they weren't as good as they need to be, you know, and Booker, definitely that is one area of criticism. I didn't think he was as good as he needs to be. That's an area where his motor, his toughness need to ramp up and needs to improve in order to make him better and Michigan State better. But it falls on a lot of guys.
Oh yeah. I think Hall,
you mentioned those long rebounds. Well, that's, you know, those are your wings. That's on those guys. You know, you can't be I know they want to play fast, but you can't be leaking out too quickly. So you're giving up long rebounds on a consistent basis, and that was a lot of it. So there was enough blame to go around, but it's kind of a good thing, because one thing I'm reasonably certain of with regard to Sunday's game is that Tennessee is going to come in with a lot of toughness, and they are going to test Michigan State from a physical perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next few days, I imagine, are going to be something of a boot camp coming off this one in terms of Michigan State and their rebounding. It's got to be better. This, some of the things we talked about that we anticipated changing, mostly pace, big positive in this one. Rebounding is another one, and that was not good tonight. Yeah. And it was at both ends. Mm-hmm. Last year, at least, Michigan State was a pretty decent defensive rebounding team. They weren't really great at either end tonight, and that was disappointing.
Yep. And so the final key to the game was sharpness. And so our hope was that Michigan State looked like a veteran team. And, we'd really even talked about AJ much. He had a bad shooting night. I mean, he was 3 points. He was 1 for 4, 1 for 5 from the free throw line. He was not good, but I felt like the rest of his game was good. I mean, I feel like he had command, and defensively he was good. And so I'm not too concerned. I didn't get the impression that he was not focused. He just, didn't shoot well. And then that was certainly not, there were a lot of people who had trouble at the free throw line, so that was not unique to him.
Yeah, except he's an 80% shooter coming back.
Well, right,
so,
yes.
Yeah. But it's an exhibition game. It's one game. You don't lose your mind over it. I think the encouraging thing about AJ is, I think in years past, when he was having that kind of night offensively, you might have expected that you would see him do some things
right
to try to get himself going that just made the problem worse, And you didn't really see that tonight. I thought the shots he took were all good shots. Mm-hmm. They were all in rhythm. It just didn't fall.
Yeah.
Not worried about it. And I actually like, 8 assists, 2 turnovers.
Yeah.
I'll take that.
For sure.
And I thought he was good defensively. So there were things that he did that I thought were real positive. So I was actually pretty happy with the way he played, maybe perversely, because he didn't have a great game offensively. So, with his own offense at least. So to see him stay on task with the other things, that's a big plus. I thought Michigan State played a very sharp game. Mm-hmm. We talked about that's something you would like to see early. You don't always get it. 11 turnovers. Given the pace of the game they played with, that's a pretty good number. You mentioned 82% assist rate. 2 guys with 8 assists each. Your starting point guard and your primary backup. Pretty good. And then you got assists from other guys too. We mentioned Carson Cooper had a couple. They got them from a lot of different players. So I think that's all a sign of a team that is dialed in. We talked early about the defensive execution. Looked very sharp to me. They look, we're used to Michigan State teams, Tom Izzo teams, oftentimes, as probably every listener of this podcast knows, can take several weeks to really round into shape. You don't typically expect to see them playing high level basketball early. There are a handful of exceptions to that. And typically when you see it, it's when he's had very experienced teams. So I think back to the 2000-2001 team, mm-hmm. the year after the national title. That team playing a more or less typical MSU schedule, I believe went undefeated in the non-conference. Looked outstanding in November and December. I think back to the Denzel Valentine
I was going to mention that too.
Year team. Looked very, very good. There have been a handful of others, but those are the 2 that really stand out. More often than not, we're talking about a team that needs to round into shape. Right now, and again, this is pending what we see over the next few weeks, but from what I saw tonight, they're where I would want them to be. They look like they are a cohesive team that understands how to play with each other. And that's saying that, that's even looking at substitution patterns that are not what they're going to be.
Yeah, weird ones. Yeah.
Come, they're not going to do a hockey line change the way they did tonight at the 15 and change mark.
Yeah.
They're not going to do that. But they, even having said that, when all those freshmen, they had that second unit of 3 freshmen, 2 sophomores out there, that team looked coherent.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't, they didn't look like they were rattled at all, at both ends. So I think that's all really, really encouraging stuff. And the mistakes that were made were pretty minimal. You can talk about the rebounding, but I don't think that's really a sharpness issue. Free throws would be the only thing I would look at and say, yeah, you got to tighten that up. But again, if you're going to lose your mind over an 11 for 20 performance at the line in the first exhibition game, you got to find another hobby.
For sure. I'm
not that worried about it. The greater, the larger scale view, larger scope view should definitely lead you to conclude, wow, that's a team that looks like they've really got their shit together right now. And so then, if that's true, and we see that borne out as they move through November and December, then the challenge is going to be, which sometimes teams are not able to successfully accomplish, how do you maintain or build upon that? In a way, it can be a little easier if you're starting from a rough spot, say, okay, we got to get a lot better. But when you're already playing really well, how do you maintain that for 5 months? I don't happen to think this is the reason, but you could, just on the surface, you could lob that accusation maybe at a team like Purdue last year, right?
Yeah.
Where they looked so good in November and December that realistically you could say, well, there's no way you can maintain that for 5 months. And sure enough, they didn't. 7-5 in their last 12 games. They were not the same team that they had been. But that's not all on them. It's also that opponents get better. Other teams improve too. But that's going to be, if Michigan State is playing at a very high level early, that's going to be a different kind of challenge for them. But we'll see if they're up to it. Can you find ways to maintain it? Avoid slippage. The Valentine team, as the most recent example of this, I think had some slippage once they got into Big Ten play, primarily due to the fact that, if you remember correctly, Denzel got hurt.
Yep.
And that sort of derailed them for maybe 2 or 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
They really weren't quite what they had been. Even when he came back, they weren't quite the same team. It took them a while, and they eventually found their rhythm again, and of course lost in the tournament. But I mean, prior to that, they had found their rhythm again and were playing at a very high level. So it's a challenge. The college basketball season is definitely a marathon. So you can't get too high or too low based on what you're seeing in November. But for a first game, hey, they checked all the boxes.
The only thing to add with as far as sharpness goes is, and I don't think we really talked about him, is Tyson Walker looked, I'd asked you in the preseason, like, well, he's kind of hit a ceiling. Is there more that we can see from Tyson? I think we saw more tonight. I mean, someone who is super comfortable, super smooth. I mean, and I think just because of his comfort level or just, experience or some combination, just more tenacious on defense. I think just he's been in the system now for 4 years. And so, so 3 years.
Third year.
It really shows. And his, like you
I
said,
agree.
he's going to be a more of a pest than he was even at the end of last year.
One thing that's worth mentioning when you bring him up that I did see tonight from Michigan State's starting backcourt, all 3 guys working together.
Mm-hmm.
They are finding, and they did it multiple times, angles on what would typically be called skip passes, where they're not going around the horn or through an intermediate passer to get the ball to a corner, let's say, which is where most of those plays went. They are finding angles, they were tonight at least, they were finding angles that I don't recall seeing. And Tyson was part of that. All 3 of those guys both made those plays, made those passes, usually off some penetration or an angle they got on somebody. And I believe all three of them were also recipients of those plays for open looks. And in Tyson and Jaden's case, they were able to bury some of those shots. AJ was not. It was, and pay attention to the Tennessee game. I know I will, and see if you can, if you see Michigan State doing that again. It's very, very effective. I do wonder if it shows up too often as a tendency. That it was something that struck me as maybe being able to be scouted. That when a guy, Tyson Walker turns the corner in a certain spot on the floor, you'd be pretty sure the ball is going to be going on a skip pass to Jaden Akins, and you can use that to maybe create turnovers. But it was very effective tonight. And so that's, again, something going back to sharpness. These guys have played so much basketball together that it does produce some advantages, in knowing where they're going to be, kind of reading each other without having to say anything. You just know, okay, if I've got this kind of advantage here, I know Jaden's going to be in the corner and he's going to be open. And they read each other at a very, very high level. At least that's the way it looked tonight.
Yep. No, I agree. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Again, I just want to remind you to check out nudgeprinting.com for discount Final Four coupon code to get 20% off your order. The brothers at Just Do Gutters at brothersgutters.com. You get 10% off. You mentioned Final Four to get your estimate. And for those of you wondering, the scoreboard is really cool. The ice cream sandwich was fantastic. And the heckler did not move. We could see him the 4 or 5 sections over from where we were sitting, our new seats.
Wow.
And so I didn't hear a peep from him. And we're actually 2 rows closer, which surprisingly makes a big difference in your viewing angle, even from the top, how much closer things seem, even just down 2 rows. So we really enjoyed ourselves, and even though it was a kind of cruddy weather in the rain, but dry in the Breslin Center. So we'll get back to you for the pregame for Tennessee in just a little bit. So until next time, the Final Four's on the schedule. Go Green.